Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another tropical outlook and forecast here by Agent Weather Forecast. And as you do see, we are going to be talking about Bill and where can it form and when can it form here, as models have continued to be very consistent within the storm. And we have a big update. Now the National Hurricane Center has put a probability for the Bay of Campeche and have an area of interest here for the next 5 days. So very interesting. Things are getting a little bit more serious. We have a better probability for the storm to form in general here. So we have a lot to talk about. We're going to be looking at where can the storm form, when can it form, and where can it impact. So all of that will be talked about in this video. If you love tropical outlooks and forecasts, I would recommend you do subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. You can get notified throughout the whole tropical season. And as well, I would recommend you guys as well hit that bell icon so you guys can get notified as soon as I post a video so you can get the latest information. But without further ado, let's get to the tropical outlook. So let's go ahead and get a look now at the National Hurricane Center, and we do have a very interesting 20% here area of interest here at AOI right here across portions of the Bay of Campeche, which obviously is the area where we are watching out for this low pressure to develop here. So it's very interesting though that the National Hurricane Center has already put something out, because this is really mainly, I say, 6 to 7 days out, but they already do have a 20% chance to, I'm not sure why that happened, they do have a 20% chance here for the next 5 days. So we do have a low pressure expected to form early next week, obviously, across portions of the Bay of Campeche, and then make its way towards the southwestern Gulf of Mexico here. So there is a chance this can very well develop here, and it definitely has something to keep a close eye on, and this probability will most likely increase as we go into the weekend. So next 48 hours, obviously a 0%, very low. They say near 0%, but I know it'll be 0%. And then the formation through the next 5 days is very low, 20%. So the next 5 days do that. That is the 16th of June. And this storm will most likely be a tropical depression or an invest probably by the 17th here. So I think this will stay at 20% throughout today. And once you get to probably to tomorrow, that most likely become a 30%, because then the 5 day for tomorrow will be the 17th, which is exactly the day we're going to be watching out for. So 20% here. So very interesting here. This is the 8 a.m. update of the National Hurricane Center. We're going to be watching out for the overnight advisory here, so it's going to be very interesting here. But let's now go ahead and get a look on the updates of what models are showing and whether they're still consistent on this storm. So here's a look now at the GFS update here on the 12Z. So let's now go ahead and get a look at what the GFS is showing. So actually the GFS is taking a little bit of a different approach here. They're actually not having this low development in the Bay of Campeche, which is very interesting. That's the first time they have not had this low development in the Bay of Campeche for, I say, the past 4-ish days. I mean, they've been consistent for 4 or 5 days on the Bay of Campeche, like the CMC, but they actually have the low pressure kind of coming out of the Western Caribbean here, and actually becoming a low that could very well become tropical just outside of Cuba, between Cuba and Florida. So by the 17th here, they actually have a low pressure of 1,005 millibars in the morning hours of the 17th. So very interesting. And then by once we get to June 18th, they have 1,001 millibars, and most likely a very weak tropical storm making landfall in the central portion of the Gulf Coast. So they actually have it making landfall near Alabama and Florida. So a very big update compared to the last one yesterday. GFS had this making landfall near Louisiana and Texas, and now they have it all the way up here near portions of the northeast Gulf of Mexico. The last time a model has showed this landfall for this specific region was way back last week. I mean, last week, maybe like, I'd say probably like the 7th or the 8th, or no, like maybe the 6th or 7th was the last time the model showed hitting this region here. So they'll definitely bring in a lot more rain for areas like Georgia, Alabama, and the Florida Keys. So not Florida Keys, sorry, Florida Panhandle. So definitely pretty big, significant change on the update. But let's not go ahead and get a look now at the CMC. See what the CMC has to say, whether they are going with a new change in region, and they are not. They still have this low pressure developing just outside the Yucatan Peninsula in the Bay of Campeche. So the low pressure will kind of come off Yucatan by the 16th here, and then become most likely a tropical system by the 17th, which is what the GFS is showing. And they have it up to, I believe, 1,003 millibars. And then they actually get to now 998 millibars. So they do have a little bit different change. It looks like the GFS and CMC are taking a little bit more eastern approach, because CMC, I believe, yesterday did show it hitting Galveston and Houston. But now they have it kind of taking a different approach and going to Louisiana. So now we have a big change as we have an invest. Now we're watching out for, once again, the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico. So I'm not saying Texas is out of the question, because obviously models have been consistent for Texas for days now, so we can't just rule them out because of one update. So I think overall we have to watch out for much of the Gulf of Mexico. There's still a lot of uncertainty. It looked like we had a pretty good decision in forecast. We kind of had it down to here, but now that boundary has completely disappeared, and that's exactly why things can change dramatically. So obviously, that's why you have to be careful what you say when it comes to storms this far out, and that's why we kind of have the whole Gulf of Mexico to really watch out for, because now we have the Louisiana shown as landfall, and then we also now have Florida and Alabama shown as landfall. So definitely a huge, huge change. Let's now go ahead and get a look at the GFS, looking at the vorticity here, cyclonic vorticity, so seeing if there's any cyclonic rotation within an area of a low, and there definitely is going to be some scattered but very disorganized amount of vorticity here when this low pressure does come off the Western Caribbean and Yucatan Peninsula. So we do have an area to watch out for. Right there's that low with that vorticity on the 17th here, so it's very disorganized. There's a ton of vorticity and convection around this low pressure, but just not it's not close. But by the time we get now to the 18th, this storm seems to get its act together. By the 18th, this storm is supposedly going to be tropical storm status, pressure wise, and then it obviously hits areas near the panhandle of Florida and as well portions there of Florida. So there's definitely a pretty big update with vorticity wise. Definitely vorticity is not as strong, neither is a storm strength, because obviously yesterday this storm was getting it to 987 according to GFS and hitting Texas, but now there's a pretty big difference, and it's not even getting below 1,000. So actually yesterday the CMC was the one that had the least amount of vorticity compared to all the three models, GFS, European, and CMC. So yesterday CMC had the least amount of vorticity. But now it looks like the CMC has the strongest vorticity signature out of those three models. So you can kind of see by the 17th, we have some very decent amount of rotation here in vorticity within this low. So this is showing possibly this storm becoming stronger quickly. And that could be because this is actually still forming the Bay of Campeche, which has a lot better conditions than the Western Caribbean. So that could be part because there is a lot more shear according to the GFS, or at least models in general. There's going to be a lot more shear across the eastern Gulf of Mexico than the western Gulf of Mexico. So that could be reason that the storm, if it does form still in the Bay of Campeche or Yucatan, that it does become a lot more organized and stronger quickly, and it can actually form without limiting factors such as dry air rubbing the low part or shear kind of becoming the storm, making the storm lopsided. That's kind of what the GFS is showing, of all scattered vorticity. But we have to confirm that once we look at the shear. But as you do see, this system does get its act together a little bit as it goes later into the 17th here. And then eventually getting into the 18th, you can kind of see just before landfall, there's that low pressure. Does it have that strong upper quadrant with vorticity? So overall, CMC is not looking too shabby when it comes to vorticity here. But let's now go ahead and get a look at the European. So here's a look now at the European here. This is the 0Z, because obviously we have 0Z, then it goes to all the way, I believe, going to 12Z, and then it goes, I think it only does 0 and 12Z here, not 0, 6, 12, and 18. But let's go to the next 120 hours there. That's kind of when we start to see that low pressure moving within the Bay of Campeche. And then by the 17th here, with that low pressure and that storm that's going to have some type of vorticity kind of surrounding that low. And there you see those isobars signifying there is going to be some strong wind along that low. And the European still kind of consistent within Texas and Louisiana border. The European has been showing that for, I think, the past 2 or 3 days. And now the GFS is showing here. And the CMC as well is showing here. So there is 2 models out of the 3 global models we're looking at that are showing Louisiana/Texas. And there's obviously one showing Florida Panhandle, which is GFS. But decent amount of vorticity according to the European. Not sure if it's as tight as the one, the CMC. But it sure does look a lot more organized for sure. Making landfall right there near Lake Charles and Beaumont. And then going out through Tyler, Texas. And then making its way towards portion of Dixie Island southeast. So let's now go ahead and get a look now at the 10-meter winds here in miles an hour for the GFS. So there you see that area of low, like I did say, there's going to be a lot of shear. So this storm's going to be mainly lopsided. There is going to be, I believe, according to the last update, there is going to be some dry air across portions of the western Gulf of Mexico. So that will be the only big limiting factor if this storm does form in the Bay of Campeche and not the Yucatan Peninsula. But there's going to be some dry air possibly making this low pressure a lot more lopsided, which you see those western or those eastern quadrants there, upper right and lower right as well. Those eastern quadrants do have the strongest amount of winds there. and that low pressure is going to be right here by the 18th. But all this is very lopsided. That could either be because of shear. You kind of see that ridge kind of possibly kind of keeping the storm within this region. And then we have the dryer most likely cutting in within this low pressure, opening it up and making it very lopsided. So that's why this could very well, this low pressure is shown being so weak, because of the amount of dry air and the amount of shear that will be within the region at the exact same time, which is why GFS has it struggling to get below 1,000 millibars. So we do actually have up to 51 miles an hour here. So it is definitely still a decent looking tropical storm wind-wise, but it does seem it's going to be very disorganized, getting up to 54 miles an hour, 53.8 by June 18th here into the into the morning hours here. And then just before landfall, this storm possibly gets to 53 miles an hour. So we're talking maybe a definitely moderate size and moderate strength tropical storm here. So it's something to keep a close eye on. Let's not go ahead and get a look now at the shear value. So by the 16th here, we have a pretty good amount of shear across both the Yucatan Peninsula and Central Gulf of Mexico. Let's actually now go into the Gulf of Mexico here. So if this storm would form in the Bay of Campeche, obviously it would have a lot better conditions. By the 16th, this low comes off the Mexico. It has very little shear, but 16th, there is a ton of shear in the Western Caribbean, but obviously if the low develops there, it'll have to clear out by the 17th. So by the 17th here, a lot of that shear actually opens up right here, just outside Yucatan, and that shear in the Bay of Campeche is still very low. So there's really questions whether it's going to be here or here, and I do believe the GFS is not going to be consistent with this whatsoever, and I still think the Bay of Campeche will be the area to focus, because this is one run the GFS shows this, while other models have been very consistent with Bay of Campeche, and now National Hurricane Center has confidence in Bay of Campeche. So I do believe we're not really watching out for Western Caribbean, basically, because there's going to be a ton of shear still. I mean, even if this low doesn't get here, it's surrounded. I mean, it is surrounded by shear here. So the only thing is, if this low, like the CMC shows, forms like this, or comes off like the 17th here, the 17th, there's very little shear, and then it goes to the north, towards Louisiana, it definitely has a good chance to definitely have a decent living storm, because obviously it kind of takes it this way. The CMC kind of takes that low this way. So it definitely would have a pretty good path here, but there's still a ton of shear across the Gulf of Mexico at this time. The only thing is there is going to be a pretty big opening last minute in the 18th here in the Eastern Caribbean. So if this storm can sneak its way this way, it would definitely have a pretty favorable path, but it's just a matter of time. Obviously, if these lows are very, very small, it will be a lot easier for these storms to actually get its act together, because if it's a lot bigger, that shear has a lot more opportunity to break this storm apart, since it has a bigger wind field. I was going to say wingspan, but obviously that's obviously last time I checked, hurricanes don't have wings. But you see there's still going to be that pretty significant moisture wave. However, GFS, of course, is taking that moisture wave more to the east. And there, like I did say, there's going to be some dry air to the west that can very well rip this storm apart here. So that's exactly why it's so lopsided. I'm still really watching out for the Bay of Campeche, though. I don't think this one run is going to make anything different. I think the GFS may well start showing the Bay of Campeche again, but 16 to 17, there's still a ton of moisture in the Bay of Campeche. And if this Bay of Campeche storm low does follow this moisture, it's still going to hit Louisiana, like the CMC does show it, and like the European as well. So very interesting. Obviously, SSTs are very, very warm right now. Our warmest right now are going to be for portions of the Western Caribbean and Eastern Gulf of Mexico, experiencing up to 30 or almost 29.9 degrees Celsius. But Bay of Campeche right now is very, very warm. But those two areas, Yucatan Peninsula and Bay of Campeche, are very, very, very warm right now. So either way, we're definitely keeping a close eye on it. But by the let's go now by the 16th here, which is when these lows will most likely kind of come to waters. Western Caribbean is very warm, so is Bay of Campeche, especially the southern portion of Bay of Campeche. And then by the 18th, these waters rapidly warm, well, not rapidly, but do warm up quite significantly just outside of Louisiana. So either way, waters are going to be warm enough to sustain these storms. Let's now go ahead and get a look now at the tropical depression probability here by the European, and a huge, huge difference has happened now. I mean, a huge probability now. 0 to 3 days, the European does have a 90 to 100% chance for tropical depression winds in the far southern Bay of Campeche. But like I did say, I don't see this forming below within the next 5 days. But as we now go later on here in the next 14th and 17th, we still have a very, very large 70 to 80%. So we have a huge, huge increase in probabilities compared to yesterday. Yesterday, I think we only had 50 to 60. Now we have up to a 90 to 100, and obviously it looks like the European is taking the storm towards Texas and Louisiana, but they still have a huge increase in probability here. So the storm is becoming a lot more likely to happen, and just the location is the only iffy part. So 60 to 70 right there with a very large 50 to 60. So either way, there is more than 50% of the storm that's happened according to the European at least tropical depression. Let's now go and look at the tropical storm probability here. That's the thing I'm really watching out, and this as well has increased. We not only, I mean, it was, I think 10 to 20 yesterday, but we now have a very, very, very large 20 to 30. So that is a slight increase with a big area included.